Funds India Private Wealth presents The Future of Private Wealth, Conversation on Lasting Legacies, powered by CNBC TV 18.
Hello and welcome to Funds India Private Wealth presents The Future of Private Wealth, Conversations on Lasting Legacies, powered by CNBC TV 18. We often talk about creating wealth, but far less attention is given to protecting it, organizing it, and ensuring it transitions smoothly across generations, across jurisdictions, and across life stages. Wealth continuity doesn't happen automatically. It requires structure, it requires documentation, and most importantly, it requires foresight. In today's episode, we go beyond inheritance to examine how families can bring clarity, governance, and resilience into long-term wealth planning. I'm Ritu Bhandari, and joining me today are two leaders who work at the intersection of advisory, real estate structuring, and intergenerational estate planning. Srinivas Mendu, CEO of Funds India Private Wealth, and Nikhil Mudbhatkal, Senior Vice President, Estate and Succession Planning at Funds India Private Wealth. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First up, Nikhil, if I may start with you, why is long-term wealth planning becoming increasingly critical for families and for individuals in India today?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. One of the few data points I would like to share before we start. One, absolutely the study which was done on a global level, which was done for about 20 years of time, where thousands of family, the institutions met. One of the critical findings, they found out that almost 70% of the wealthy families, lose out on significant amount of wealth once, it is going to the second generation. And that percentage significantly increases to 90% when it goes to third generation. So something at a family level also, people are not doing the right structuring or doing the basic things which are required. Second aspect is when it comes to India, okay, one very important data point is the unclaimed assets, which as per the media articles, as on today, which is close to 2 lakh crores. Now that is like a crime what you do, okay. The family member has passed away, the other family member don't even know that they have to go and claim those assets. That is one. Okay, at least you have to make a asset register, okay, clearly, discuss with your family members, what is your thought process, where my assets are, so that there is no unclaimed assets. Very important aspect is not even, I would say 2 to 3% of the Indians have made their will. And this is across all sections of the society. Not, I'm talking about just ultra HNI or HNIs. Even at affluent families, they have not done it. Even at a HNI level, many people have not done as basic as a will, as such. So that's where it becomes extremely important, okay, to have that planning in place, to have that succession planning in place.
Srinivas, you want to add to that?
No, absolutely. I think, what Nikhil well said with the data, right? You create wealth and you are not aware how to transit that to a next generation. So it is important, as a wealth managers for us to how do not only, in terms of creating wealth, but also preserving wealth. And beyond that, how can we transfer the wealth seamlessly to the next generation? It's very important, right? And that is the awareness which we want to create. And basic thing to start with is to discuss with your family about your own assets and then, have a basic will in place.
Right. And sometimes even that very basic communication is missing from most families.
Absolutely.
Right?
Otherwise, I don't think we would have seen this 2 lakh crore of unclaimed, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Nikhil, how do estate planning, succession strategies, and really tax-aware structuring all come together? How does that get integrated into a succession plan? And, what are some of the big do's and don'ts that you advise to your customers?
Oh, that's a very important aspect, because when we talk about succession planning, it's not just about, drafting few documents, taking few signatures and just keeping it in your home locker or bank locker and forget about it, because that can also have a detrimental effect. The first thing always starts with discussing with your family. Whenever you are talking about succession planning, please have an open discussion with your family that what are your thought processes, where all your assets are, what is that you're thinking from your personal assets, your business assets point of view. Because in terms of promoter families, the shares of the company is also significant. Who is going to inherit that? That is also of extreme importance. So one is that discussion, it starts with that. Okay, it starts always from the discussion point. The second is the execution part. The basic thing is, as we discussed, the will is an extremely important aspect, that you should execute a will. and make sure that it is executed very correctly and you use the right terminology, do's and don'ts. Just to give you a few examples, people have executed wills but they have not thought through properly. So that's why the professional guidance is also very important. I know in today's AI age you can do a lot of things yourself, but especially in these kind of matters when there are legal aspects, there are taxation aspects, please seek a professional advice. That is number one. Second is we have seen people casually taking, witnesses as a, any person as signing as a witness authority. Please do not do that. Make sure that you know the witness exactly who is the witness. Definitely beneficiary cannot be the witness of a will, but still whoever is that third party, you should know them. It can be anybody, around you, because at a later date those people may be required at a court. So that is extremely important. Third is that when you also use the term taxation, that is extremely important as well, because for affluent families, HNI, ultra and HNIs, when we are talking about family trust structures as such, one is obviously for India, okay, that's for only assets in India. There can be cross-border structuring as well. Yeah. But when we look at an Indian trust, one thing is important, you keep it simple, okay, it has to be objective driven, not just because somebody has made a trust, you also have to do it. Of course, the objectives has to be clear. You need to make sure that who is settling the trust, who is the trustee, how the beneficiaries are defined, extremely important, because if you don't do that, there can be a tax, implication, I would say, in that matter as well. So just to give you a simple example, we had one case, where they had made a non-blood relative as the beneficiary of a trust, of a family trust I am talking about. So there was a tax implication when the contribution was made, and rightly so. So that is also needs to be taken care. And especially when we talk about, having beneficiaries who are not in India, in Indian families, lot of their children are, studying abroad, yeah. Okay. They may be either in United States, US. So accordingly, the trust structuring also has to be, changed accordingly. It cannot be, a one size fits all kind of a theme, and you just go and execute a trust, right. Because that can have again a, significant tax impact in United States if you have not thought through properly. So that's why it's extremely becomes again very important that seek professional advice, okay. Have a local tax opinion also of that specific country. That is also extremely important to have. And then at the end, go and execute a trust structure or any kind of structure you are looking at.
What are some of the most common oversights that you've come across when it comes to long-term wealth planning, especially with first-time entrepreneurs or first-time wealth generators of a family?
When I'm talking about a family trust and a long-term asset protection or a long-term succession planning, objective, that my objective is that to make sure that the coming generation also benefits from the legacy what the first generation has created. So the whole objective, one, the structuring has to be very clear and very right. What type of structure you are doing. Second, extremely important is the governance model. You have created a structure, that's great, but what is the governing model? For example, how are you going to make sure that at what time, what age, under what life event the assets are going to the beneficiary, either the income goes or whatever, a significant amount goes to them. Otherwise, creating structure can have a detrimental effect also if your governing model is not correct or the governance structure is not correct into the trust. So one needs to absolutely make sure that before executing it, have that very clear and candid discussion with the family that, okay, what are the do's and don'ts, when the asset should go, and it's also equally important that when the asset should not go, who should be the beneficiary, also equally important, who cannot be the beneficiary of the trust.
Srinivas, common oversights?
So I think common oversights, in my experience, I've seen clients, every client has a goal, and how disciplined you are in following that goal and achieving that. And for that, banker also should be there. Unfortunately, Mridul, what happens, right, a banker is not staying for a long period of time. So I have set a goal, but banker has recommended something and the banker is again moving on, right? Yeah. So there is a disconnect, and thereby, client is also, missing on that link. So hence at Funds India, we wanted to help the client and be with the client for a long period of time. So that one thing which we have done here, right, where my bankers don't have an obligation on the retirement. That allows banker to be with the client and ensure that the client is achieving his or her goals and be with them, right? And thereby wealth creation happens.
Right.
Absolutely. Just to add, very important aspect is the oversight also what you said. One is that as simple as writing a will, which is a very basic thing every individual should have. I have seen many people, just because their relatives came to their house, they wrote a will, for their own assets, and they took them as a signatory, as a witness, which is okay. But technically, they were all US citizens. They are in US. They can become. It's not that they cannot. But the challenge is in future, even the executors of the will, I would say, which is a very important aspect. In a will, you appoint an executor who will be, responsible to execute the will post lifetime of the testator. Now that person is also a US person. Now, are you saying that that person will come from US to execute your will? Of course, you can further do that. We can have more executors, etc. But it was very oversight. They took it very casually. So we have to change. Luckily, we saw that will, okay, and we have changed the will accordingly and make the local. And there were local people, but just because there was a function at home and everybody was there, they just took randomly, signatures.
A lot of the people don't tend to take this documentation very seriously because we are not accustomed to thinking about death. As a culture also.
As a culture
it's
also,
a morbid topic and nobody wants to talk about when you're going to die.
Absolutely. We always have this myth, right? I can lie, live long, I'm doing good, everything. And we are in a hookah world, right? We don't know what happens next. The other awareness, right? Today, as long as I'm healthy and I'm doing fine, I take care of the family. What if something happens to me? That's a question one should ask.
Yes.
Right? If something happens to me and if I'm not, have this proper, will, etc., ring fencing is done for a family, right? They are going to suffer.
Again, going back to the documentation piece, now many individuals have very good intentions. They know what should happen after they die, and they know that, in their minds, they know this is how the succession plan must go, but nothing is documented.
Yes.
Now, how do you help them go from these ideas and this vision to a very formal structure?
Oh, that's a, very important question. Because once something is there in your mind, and as we, said that there is a cultural aspect as well, that generally people think that informal way also my family will do, because that's my thought, that's how we did it. Future generation will also do the same. But there is something known as an interstate succession law in India. What it simply means is that if you have not decided for yourself, the law will decide for you. Okay, then there are specific relationship categorically mentioned. So there are different laws like a Hindu Succession Act or a Indian Succession Act, Sharia for Muslims, so on and so forth. So if we take a simple example of a Hindu Succession Act, if a married male passes away, let's say the class 1 legal heir will have the absolute right on all the assets. And similar for women, the class 1 legal heirs are slightly different for a woman than a male. Okay. Now, my objective may be that, okay, I have thought in my mind that, okay, this particular asset will go to my son, this particular asset may go to my daughter, or to my financial asset may go to my spouse. I may have certain philanthropic objectives, so on and so forth. But until I write that in a piece of paper, which is known as a will, and execute it properly, that's not what's going to happen. All the class 1 legal heirs will have equal right on that, and everybody will have, they have to decide amongst themselves. That is when the possibility, I would not say that all the time, but that is when the possibility is there can be a dispute that who will decide, because the patriarch is no more there of the family. Then who will decide what? Who will inherit which asset? Okay, because you have not decided, you have left it to your family members to decide. That brings to one more data point also, that if you see most of the property disputes, it's almost more than I would say close to 60%, which is their property dispute. Out of which significant amount of cases are related to family dispute also, because people are not settling within the family, so they have to go to the courts and get it settled. But might as well, if you have done a basic will, yes, at least that would happen. But as I said, even that has to be done properly. Okay, one thing is that you do the will, go and register it. That is extremely important, though it's not mandatory, highly recommended to go and register it. Have a doctor's certificate attached of a sound mind before you are registering it. These are the small aspects which becomes very important aspect when you are registering the will. People also oversee that if I am a joint account holder, by default I will become the owner of that asset. But that's not the case. That will not going to happen in a real estate, or even for that matter, bank account as such, because the possibility is that the other legal heirs will have the claim on that particular in case of absence of a will, and there are enough case laws to justify that.
Well, on that very, very informative note, we are going to head into a short break right now. We've discussed why continuity planning matters and how intentions must move from informal conversations to formal structures. When we return, we'll examine cross-border complexities, liquidity planning during transition events, and how succession strategy differs for entrepreneurs versus professionals. Stay with us on CNBC TV 18.
Funds India Private Wealth presents The Future of Private Wealth, conversation on lasting legacies, powered by CNBC TV 18. Funds India Private Wealth presents The Future of Private Wealth, conversation on lasting legacies, powered by CNBC TV 18.
Welcome back. You are watching Funds India Private Wealth presents The Future of Private Wealth, conversations on lasting legacies, powered by CNBC TV 18. In this segment, we move from foundational planning to more complex realities, global assets, liquidity pressures, and tailoring succession strategies for different wealth creators. Now, Srinivas, if I may begin with you, families today often have assets that are distributed around the world in different geographies. They've spent some time abroad, they've bought a property there, they hold some bank accounts there, they have wealth in India as well. How do you bring cross-border assets and wealth into one consolidated framework, and again, do's and don'ts for that as well?
Yeah, I think this is where the bigger risk lies, right? And idea is to understand the jurisdiction and help the client structuring it. And we do structure. There are a couple of jurisdictions which really helps in structuring it, whether it is Dubai, DIFC, or Singapore, etc. And at Funds India, we understand that we try and probably do the right things for the client. How can we ensure that everything is under one basket so that it will be useful for the clients.
Let's also talk about the succession planning that needs to be different for different kinds of professionals. So you have a section of self-made entrepreneurs,
yes,
or family business, generations who are taking over the family business versus salaried professionals.
Yes.
How should succession planning be different for the two of these categories? And is there a mindset difference that you find when you speak to these categories?
Yes, there is a bit of. One is that you said, people who are salaried versus, somebody running a business, let's put it in simple two buckets. So one is that if somebody is at a, even at a salaried, they might be, HNIs, ultra HNIs also drawing good salaries, and they have made a significant wealth. Their objective may be, how the transition happens to the next generation smoothly. And they also worried about that, okay, it should not be misused. Okay, asset will obviously go to them, but make sure that they get it at a right age, at a right time. Tomorrow, any kind of eventuality hits them, the family asset should not be, destroyed. Okay, that is one objective, obviously. But when it comes to business family as such, they are also worried about what happens to the business as such. Okay.
The legacy that they are
Absolutely,
creating.
the legacy. It's a private limited company, let's say for example, and they are running it. Either they may come up for a listing in future, that's a separate, but they may want to retain certain shares of their company into a family trust. Right. Of course, there are certain, I would say always recommend to have a tax advice, etc. on that as well. But by doing that, what one thing happens is that because it's a part of a structure, an individual cannot take a call tomorrow, whether he wants to sell it or not. If next generation, let's say one of the person wants to sell the shares, they are open to sell the shares. Okay, even after listing post the lock-in period, they are open to sell the shares of the company. Now, because it's a part of a family trust, there is a compliance around it. Okay, there is a group of people or group of advisor or group of trustees who will authorize what will happen with those shares. So the whole objective is that the control remains within the family. Okay, of such companies. It should not, go out of the family. So that is one different, I would say, thought process how the, business owners generally think.
Well, before we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave our viewers who are watching this conversation today with some practical advice. So, if you had to give them one step each that they can perhaps take just this month in terms of, planning their long-term wealth better, what is that first step that they can take? Srinivas?
Yeah. I think, I take this opportunity through CNBC, every viewer should ask a question. Am I well prepared for the family? Do I have a basic will in place? I'll tell you a myth. I've been a banker, right, last 25 years. When I started my career, nomination was not part of the banking norms, right? It was not compulsory or a mandatory, right? Today, without nomination, you can't do any transaction. That's the transition which happened in India, right? With a lot of regulatory push. The same thing is the nomination is good enough. Ask yourself, no, nomination is not good enough. Therefore, we need to look at how do we ring fence by creating one more layer or de-risking from a nomination by adding a will as a part of a layer. So that's something everyone should ask. When we are alive, as you rightly said, everything can happen, but something happens to us. Is the family? Are we creating some problem in the family? I think will can solve that problem.
At what age should we start thinking about having a will? Because everybody feels, oh, we are too young. We have our entire lives to go.
The day you start, I think, the moment you become a major and start working, you should create, right? There's a savings for you. You started saving for, started saving for yourself, right? You should create a will.
Sure, I think regardless of COVID, we have seen enough in our experience that even younger people have passed away at the age of 30, 32, 35, 40. Any age you take it, people, because of cardiac arrest or anything, or because of accidents or anything can happen to anyone, anytime. So number one, I would always request to have the conversation with the family, because that's where it starts. Okay, documentation, etc. is the later part. Okay, that can be executed easily. It's not difficult. The first step is to have a clear, unbiased discussion with your family that what is your thought process. Okay, what do you want to do? If at all there are issues, please iron that out. That is the first thing, because that will in turn later on avoid any kind of disputes happening. Right. Don't give surprises to your family that some third party is reading out your will to your children and your spouse. That is the last thing you want to do, maybe not even the last. Have that clear discussion with your family and then execute the plan accordingly. That's where it starts. So that's what I would say.
Get logical and stop being emotional about it.
Absolutely. Correct. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, Nikhil, Srinivas, thank you so much for joining us today. That was an incredibly informative conversation that we had with you all.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, you heard the experts. Wealth continuity planning is not a last-minute legal formality. It is a disciplined framework that brings structure to assets, clarity to responsibilities, and stability during moments of transition. Whether you're a founder preparing for leadership succession, a professional with global investments, or part of a multi-generational family enterprise, early planning reduces friction, protects your relationships, and preserves value. Conversations create awareness, but documentation creates certainty. Hope you enjoyed those insights. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Until next time, invest wisely, think long-term, and build with purpose. Goodbye.
Funds India Private Wealth presents The Future of Private Wealth, conversation on lasting legacies, powered by CNBC TV 18.